Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Fine. Can you see me?
Yeah. Can you see me?
No.
You can't.
No, there is a question mark where your picture should be. Probably you're blocking the video.
Maybe it's the signal.
What?
Maybe it's the signal. Is it?
No, if you can see me, why can't I see you?
Get her to call you back.
Maybe if you call me back, you can see me.
What?
Hang on 1 second. See that green button there?
Okay.
See if that helps.
Good.
There you go.
Hello?
Okay.
Hi.
There you are, okay?
Hello.
Alright, let's get going.
Okay. Okay.
And if you asked me today to give you an interview, I wouldn't. I'm that tired.
Okay. Well, so what was your first impression of Dr. Mengele?
First impression that he was a very good looking, very well dressed, and very proper, correct kind of a person, but
Okay.
also very strict.
Very strict. Okay.
You can record it and you don't have to write down anything.
Yeah, and recording it as well, just to make sure. What were the experiments like? What was a typical experiment?
There were two types of experiments that I was using. One was an observation session, which was done 3 times a week.
Oh, wow.
And they were done about 8 hours. We would sit naked or stand naked for 8 hours, and they would measure every part of my body, comparing it to my twin sister,
Yeah.
and comparing it to charts. These experiments were not dangerous, but they were very, very demeaning.
Yeah.
The other experiments were done also on alternate days, and those were done on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And there they would tie both of my arms, take a lot of blood from my left arm, and give me a lot of injection, at least 5 in my right arm. And those injections, the content of those injections, we didn't know then, nor do I know today. These were germs, diseases, and drugs. And after one of those injections, I became very ill with a very high fever. In fact, I desperately tried to hide because the rumor in the camp was that anyone taken to the hospital never came back. So my next visit to the blood lab, they did not tie my arms for blood taking and injection. Instead of that, they measured my fever, and I knew I was in trouble. I was taken to the hospital, which was another barrack filled with people who looked more dead than alive. Next morning, Dr. Mengele came in with 4 other doctors. He never examined me. He just looked at my fever chart, and he declared, laughing sarcastically, he said, "Too bad. She's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live."
Wow.
For the next 2 weeks, I was between life and death. I remember waking up on the barrack floor. I was crawling because I no longer could walk. And as I was crawling, I would fade in and out of consciousness. And I was crawling to reach a faucet with water at the other end of the barrack, because this barrack was not allocated any food, nor water, nor medicine. People were brought there to die. After 2 weeks, my fever broke, and I immediately felt a lot better and a lot stronger. And it took me another 3 weeks before my fever chart showed normal, and I was released and reunited with the other twins. After I was reunited with my sister, however, my sister looked very sick, and when I asked her what happened, she said she couldn't talk about it, and we never talked about Auschwitz until 1985. In 1985, I asked her again if she remembered when I was taken to the hospital, and she said yes. And I said, "Well, what happened to you while I was in the hospital?" Because there are no books written about Mengele's details of Mengele's experiments. And she said for the first 2 weeks after I was taken away, she was kept in isolation with Nazi doctors studying 24 hours a day, and they were waiting for something to happen. She did not know what that was, and she didn't know if it happened or it didn't happen. And it was the same 2 weeks that Mengele said I would die. Would I have died? She would have been rushed immediately to Mengele's lab, killed with an injection to the heart, and then Mengele would have done the comparative autopsies. I spoiled the experiment. I survived. And amazingly, Miriam did too. And then I asked her, what happened to you after the 2 weeks were up? She said, well, then she was injected with all kind of injections. She didn't know what that was, except that made her feel very sick. We found out years later, when she grew up, got married, and expected her first baby, that she developed severe kidney infections that did not respond to any antibiotics. Second pregnancy in '63 got worse. And this time the Israeli doctors studied her, and they found out that Miriam's kidneys never grew larger than the size of a 10-year-old child.
Wow.
I begged Miriam not to have any more children. I told her, you have 2 children, that's good enough. Every pregnancy seemed to be a life crisis.
Yeah.
But she didn't listen to me. And she had a third child. After the third child was born, her kidneys started deteriorating very fast. And by 1987, she had to go on dialysis or having a kidney transplant. She was a registered nurse. She did not want to live on dialysis, so I could and I did donate my left kidney. We were a perfect match. At that hospital near Tel Aviv, they had already done kidney transplants for 10 years, and there were about just over 2,000 kidney recipients living with kidneys. All of them were given anti-rejection medication. None developed cancerous polyps except Miriam. The cancerous polyps appeared in the bladder, and she had quite a few. They removed them. They kept coming back. The doctors tried to treat that, and for a while we thought that they could. But unfortunately, the cancer by 1993 metastasized everywhere, and Miriam died June 6, 1993.
Oh my gosh. That must have been very hard for you, yeah.
It was, I came home, I knew that she was sick.
Yeah.
And the cancer, first of all, the cancer appeared, metastasized in 1992, at which time I brought her to the United States because the Israeli doctors didn't want to do anything. So I took her to the doctor near my city in Indianapolis, and she went and they did chemotherapy, and they saved her life for a while, but she then went back to Israel, and they continued the chemotherapy for 9 months. And by January 1993, she seemed to be cancer-free, but she knew that the cancer would return because it was already so advanced, and she asked the doctors to continue it for the rest of her life, but the doctors did not want to continue it.
Yeah.
So she was very worried that the cancer would return, and it returned in the head. The brain is very protective of medicine, but there were, of course, cells that escaped the brain, and the cancer reappeared in the brain. Actually, we were making arrangements to bring her back to United States, and she died.
Oh wow. I've read places when I've studied it that they used a guinea pig and then a control. So would that mean that you?
That is the way we understand it, that Mengele did the experiments. Unfortunately, we don't have the benefit of his files.
Yeah.
The files are somewhere, but I don't know where. And the best that we can, the only book that I have read about Mengele's experiment that helped me was Dr. Nisli's book, and it's called A Doctor's Eyewitness Accounts, and he was Mengele's pathologist.
Oh, wow.
And that is available in many places, but that is the best benefit we have from all that. Unfortunately, even that book is not 100% correct, because Nisli visited the boys' camp, and he said in his book that the twins had much better conditions. That was not necessarily the rule. In our barrack, we received worse food than anybody else. Well, the only reason the boys' twins had better conditions because there was a twin by the name of Zvi Spiegel who was grown up, and he said to Mengele, "You want good subject for your experiment, you better give them better food, and I will take care of them and will provide for you good guinea pigs." He also talked to the twins, introduced each other, taught each other's names so they would have a feeling of belonging, and taught them mathematics and geography in their bunk beds, and made little soccer balls out of rags to go outside and kick the ball to keep up their spirits, and promised them that if they survived the camp, he would take them back home. In our barracks, there was nobody to take care of us, and we felt tremendously isolated and very much alone emotionally, physically, and we had very poor food, and we were starving to death.
Yeah, I heard about the potatoes. I heard when you stole the potatoes. That was very courageous.
Or stealing, only stole from one another, but if we stole from the Nazis, we called it
organizing. Yeah, I heard about that as well. After your first time stealing the potatoes from the kitchen to help Miriam. Organizing, sorry. Did you ever get given out to again about stealing the potatoes, or were they afraid to challenge you?
I organized potatoes about 3 to 4 times a week. Wow. And the steady diet of potatoes helped Miriam fight for her own life, because Miriam has given up. When I got back to the barrack, dying in Auschwitz was very easy. Yeah. And when people gave up the struggle to live one more day, it was very dangerous. So that was the reason that I had to put back into her the desire to survive and have the strength to live. And so I had to try my efforts to get her potatoes. Yeah.
Yeah. What else do I have here? I was amazed by your story of the shooting when the Nazis, when the Nazis left and then they came back and you fainted. That was...
Well, that is what I am saying. I'm trying to understand how all these things happen.
Yeah.
And I believe that one has to have a guardian angel.
Yeah, definitely.
Tremendous will to live. Both were very important in survival. Yeah. I did not plan to faint, so obviously some unbelievable power intervened that I fainted before I really planned to faint. But I was very surprised when I was alive and I woke up.
Yeah. What happened? Like, did I don't understand. Like, did they... When they were shooting people, like, were you all in a group? And is that how you woke up?
No. What was happening? We were in the kitchen.
Yeah.
The Nazis left about 9 days earlier.
Yeah.
And we were trying to find food. We needed to organize blankets because it was very cold, water and bread. And so we found this kitchen that had quite a lot of bread, and we were trying to load up on as many loaves as we could carry when we heard the strange sound of a car. No one had cars, and we were concerned, so we all ran outside with our loaves of bread to see what on earth was going on. And before we really realized, they began shooting.
Yeah, wow.
But people, I don't know how many were there, but I would say maybe 100, maybe 200, because as we found that kitchen, there were 8,500 people who remained in Auschwitz.
Wow, I didn't know.
After the first death march was ordered, and the 150,000 inmates were in Auschwitz. and only 8,500 remained. But there were a couple of hundreds of us in the kitchen because it was a huge kitchen that supplied the food for a whole camp. And we found out that this bread, so we were going to load up. All I can remember that when I woke up, there were piles of bodies everywhere.
Wow.
And then I touched one of the girls. Her body was ice cold. And this is when I realized that I was alive and they were dead.
You definitely had a guardian angel, didn't you?
Well, that's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I was also very interested in the liberation. And what are your memories of when you were liberated?
I have very clear memories. First of all, there was lots of fighting, and it seemed like we were the battlefield, and I believe if anybody would have filmed it, that's the way it looked. It was continuous artillery bombing, and one day everything was quiet, and we thought, well, maybe this would be the day we would be free. And but we didn't really know how that would happen. It was late in the afternoon when a woman ran into the barrack yelling at the top of her voice, "We are free, we are free." Well, it sounded wonderful, but I didn't quite know how she knew that we were free.
Yeah.
I want to see was she saying that. So I went outside because we were hiding inside the building.
Yeah.
When I went outside, it was snowing heavily. I stood there maybe 30 minutes before I saw at a distance lots of people. They were all wrapped in white camouflage raincoats. They were smiling from ear to ear, and the most important thing, they didn't look like the Nazis. I had no idea who they were. We ran up to them. They gave chocolate, cookies, and hugs.
Oh, wow.
And this was my first taste of freedom, for me to realize that Miriam and I were alive, that we have triumphed over unbelievable evil.
Yeah.
That my little promise to myself, that first night in the latrine, became a reality. It was an unbelievable experience.
Wow.
And the picture, the liberation picture, was not taken the day of liberation.
Oh.
We were not waiting for the Nazis, for the liberators to liberate us between two rows of barbed wire fences. We were hiding inside the building. That was a staged event that was done or the day after liberation or 2 days after liberation. They told us to put on these striped uniforms, and they marched us between two rows of barbed wire. And many of the children did not want to put on the striped prison uniforms. And I said to Miriam, it's cold outside, let's have another layer of clothing. And so therefore, Miriam and I guess ended up in the front, but I did not remember it, that we were in the front. I just remembered that we put on the uniform and we were marching between the barbed wire fences.
Yeah, it's weird because I've seen that footage. That's quite famous footage, and I have seen that. But like I didn't know until like I researched you that was you. So that was really interesting.
I didn't either because I bought the film from the Auschwitz Museum in 1978. I wanted to know how I looked. I remember the filming, and a professor at my local university told me that he was in Auschwitz, and I asked him has he seen a film between children marching between barbed wire, and he said yes. So then he gave me the address, and I wrote to the Auschwitz Museum, and I told them that I wanted to purchase the film, and they told me how much it would cost. So I have 2 copies of that film. And then I went to a friend who had a projector, but I couldn't recognize myself because the film moved too fast. And then a few years later, somebody said that I could go to the local photographer, and they could shoot 1 frame at a time, so I could study it as a hard copy, and that's what I did. And it took me 6 months with a magnifying glass to study it. Then I recognized my sister in one of the pictures. because I did not remember how I looked. I never looked in a mirror, but I remembered how she looked.
Yeah. And after you were liberated and you finally got out of when you finally got back to ports, what was that like? Going back to your hometown?
Well, it was very, very depressing because nobody survived, and the house was ransacked. It was neglected, and we found the 3 pictures of the family crumbled on the bedroom floor, and that was all that was left of my family. Within about 3 hours, the cousin came to tell us that my aunt Irena survived. She lived in the big city. Her family did not, and she wanted us to go and live with her. So he took us by train to my aunt's house. And so we lived with her for 5 years. In the meantime, communism took over in Romania.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know what communism is, they have the most beautiful slogans.
Yeah.
Freedom, brotherhood, equality, but these are all lies. There was no freedom, there was no brotherhood, and there was no equality. There was a lot of coercion. You had to follow the party orders, whatever the party said, and there was a lot of hunger. Definitely, I remember it was an inflation, and I stood one day in line for 8 hours to get a loaf of bread. When I got to the front of the line, they closed down the line, no more bread available, because the money was worth nothing.
Yeah. That's amazing.
And then everybody got like 100 lei, and everybody became very poor. It was after when I finally succeeded in leaving Romania, I would never dare open my mouth in public without turning around a couple of times to see who else was possibly listening to what I was saying. Because the secret police in Romania came to our house twice. Once they confiscated bread because they saw me eat a piece of bread on the veranda, and somebody told on me. I didn't know it was a crime to eat a piece of bread.
Yeah, that's so ridiculous.
Where on earth did we get the bread? Because nobody had it. We got it from our farm. Because after we became so hungry, my aunt asked the cousin who survived, who was about 32 years old, to work the farm and produce some bread, some wheat and flour and corn and oil. There was nothing.
Yeah.
And that is what happened. And second time they came and arrested my uncle. My aunt married a guy who lost his family, and they arrested him and took him away. And for 2 years we didn't know where he was. So I was never again very much at ease to talk in public. It took me months and months to be able to think that I could speak without worrying who was going to hear it. So I am not very fond of the Communist Party or the Communist tactics. No.
Yeah. After moving to America with your husband, I read in your book that you were still taunted by kids in your neighborhood who were unaware, like to the full extent what happened in the Holocaust.
That was a very strange occurrence.
Oh, okay.
I arrived in Terre Haute, Indiana in 1960. My husband did not have the same experiences with kids taunting him, because in our village, the year before we were taken away, our house was often surrounded by young kids, particularly teenagers, who were calling us dirty Jews, harassing us, throwing rocks, eggs, and tomatoes at our windows, sometimes for hours and hours. And when I would ask my father to go out and make them stop it, he would say, "We cannot do anything, you just have to accept it." And if it was for me, I would have gone outside and tried to stop it. So then I was here in the United States. I was here 7 years, and my son was 6 years old in 1967. He had many friends, and the little first graders came to play tricks on Halloween, And I said to my husband, what on earth is that? Because they were throwing tomatoes and they were throwing rocks and corn at the window. And he said, oh, these are just kids playing tricks. I said, so were the ones in Hungary.
Yeah.
But now I live in this great country and nobody can harass me. No one has the right to disturb my peace of mind. So I went outside and chased them away. So that became something that the kids got very excited about. And it became, unfortunately, a nightmare of 11 years.
Wow.
Because the more I responded to it, the more they came back.
Yeah.
And it was, but they didn't just respond like average kids. They threw rocks at the window, painted swastikas on our house.
Wow.
And wrote words like, go home, dirty Jew. And there was nothing that I could make it stop. And when I talked to the parents, I said, well, I don't know much about Halloween, but I am willing to give your kids all the treats that they want, but I cannot deal with the tricks.
Yeah.
And he said they didn't know anything about the Holocaust. They called me a crazy woman. I said I wasn't crazy, but they didn't. There was no information about the Holocaust. And that stopped. That went on for 11 years. I even tried to leave the United States. And I wanted to and go back to Israel because I couldn't cope with it. I was very scared.
Yeah.
And very traumatized. But my husband didn't want to leave, of course.
Yeah.
So in 1978, NBC aired the Holocaust show. Suddenly the kids watched it, and wherever I went, kids would approach me and apologize or write me letters or call me by phone. They finally understood why I was reacting the way I was reacting. But I still do not like Halloween, and Halloween is coming up next week. So I'm going to close my doors, turn off the light, and I don't want to see anybody.
Yeah. Did you find it difficult, like Miriam, was she living in Israel at this time? Did you find it difficult being without her?
Well, the first 5 years were very, very difficult. Actually, she had her first 2 children, and I had my 2 children, and neither one of us had a lot of money. But she said to me, if we cannot see each other, then what good is money for? So I said I would pay for one way to go there, and she would pay my way back, but she really couldn't. Because Miriam was always very sick after that.
Yeah.
She was always, the biggest problem for Miriam was she worked regularly, but then when she got home, she couldn't really function unless she had 2 or 3 hours sleep. And she was always tired. Of course, having problem with kidneys makes the body not function very well. And then when I formed the organization in 1978, actually I started. What I wanted to do as I was lecturing, people asked me about the experiments, and I couldn't find any information in any books, and so I decided maybe if I found all those children who were liberated with me, and we could sit down and share our memories, that it would be easier for me to understand what was done to us, but I didn't know how to find all those little children. I had no names, no telephone numbers, and this is where I began a campaign on my own to try to locate the other kids. And I wrote to the people in the media, reporters, and it took me 6 years. Actually, by December of 1983, nobody responded. And I thought, well, maybe if I formed an organization and made myself president, that they would be impressed.
Yeah.
Because I am impressed if somebody signs a letter, president. And so this is when I formed the organization Candles, and I named my sister vice president. And I had a feeling that many of the survivors would be living in Israel. And she, with the help of my brother-in-law, my husband's brother, he put in an article in the newspaper. He was a reporter, front page centric, but actually in advertising, that survivors of Mengele's experiments are looking for other survivors, and please contact this number, and my sister's telephone number. And then she called me. She said, "Well, you want the numbers? I have got 80 telephone numbers,
Wow.
and you better get yourself here in 1 week, because everybody in the media wants to talk to me, and I don't know what to tell them. That's your project." So I flew to Israel, and we had our first big gathering in Tel Aviv, and the media was definitely there. And I also took with me slides from the pictures that I have made out of that film, because I knew that the survivors were curious to see how they look. So we projected them on a screen, and I told them to write down which number, because I had, I think, 12 slides. And so they wrote down so I could make copies, hard copies for them. That was our fourth gathering. And then they said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Well, I want to go back to Auschwitz. I always wanted to see if what I remembered was indeed correct, or was that some kind of a childhood imagination." Because I wasn't sure that what I remembered was so. So as it happened to be, next year was 40th anniversary to the liberation of Auschwitz. And NBC said that they were going to allocate a crew to follow us. And so did CBS and ABC. So we had a lot of media coverage of our trip to Auschwitz.
Yeah. Did this did contacting the other children that were affected by the same thing, did this help your healing process? And did it benefit?
What it helped, what I found out very interesting is that not everybody remembered as much detail as I did. But I definitely learned more about what the scope of the experiments was. I also learned that the very young children who survived, who were under age 7, often were picked up at liberation by other survivors or by Polish women who came in to the camp after liberation and took them home with them. I was too old for anybody to pick me up, and I wouldn't have gone very easily. But that is a sad story, because some of the survivors, set of twins, were separated. In the big rush, there was a lot of confusion. We were always scared that we would be shot. And so when the liberation happened, some were racing outside, and there were all these little children, lost souls, that would go up to somebody and say, "Are you my father? Are you my mother?" And so these people picked up children and took them home. And there are right now 2 twins who were separated at the liberation, and they still haven't found their twin.
Oh wow, that's really sad.
So I learned what happened. I also learned the scope of the experiments were much more dangerous than I was aware of. There were 3 twins who also suffered from kidney problems. So that was one of the experiments that my sister ultimately died of. And there is a twin in Israel who is twin brother was castrated, and shortly after that he died. So Mengele wanted to create blue-eyed blondes in multiple numbers. He wanted to be able to figure out how to create males or females. So he actually wanted to play God. And twins who were in reproductive age were used in bizarre experiments. Some were used in cross blood transfusion between male twins and female twins. There are 2 twins, I think they are still alive, living in Australia, who survived from the cross blood transfusion. But most of them died because they have not checked to see if they were he had the compatible blood.
Yeah.
So Mengele just wanted to see if he could somehow change the composition of the blood and make girls into boys and boys into girls.
Yeah, that's awful, isn't it?
But what I learned, but also it was important that the twins, particularly in Israel, but also some in the United States, they had somebody to talk to. And they couldn't talk to their spouses about
no one else would understand, really. So,
correct. So it became a very good camaraderie between the twins. They also would go to one another's events, family events, weddings of their children, or other events such as the birth of a grandchild. So they became a support group for one another.
That's really good.
In the United States, the distances are much larger, and that was not quite as possible.
Yeah. And like, it must have been like, since you signed the Declaration of Amnesty, how do you feel this has affected your attitude towards the perpetrators of the Holocaust?
Well, not only the perpetrators of the Holocaust. When I decided to forgive the Nazis, and I signed that document, I for the first time realized that I had power over my life, that I did not have to be for the rest of my life a victim. And that is a very important lesson, not only for me, but a lesson for everybody in the world.
Yeah.
The largest group of people who contact me are abused children. And they are everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
You don't have to live through an Auschwitz and Mengele. You can live through an unloving parent or abusive parents.
Yeah.
And what do those children have? For them, the nightmare, it's even more traumatic than for us, because these are the parents who are abusing or neglecting them. I'm just in contact right now with a young girl who her parents abused her, and she didn't have anywhere to live. She's living now with her grandmother, and she's asking me for advice. And I told her that I am right now very, very busy and very tired, physically tired. I would try to figure out a way to help her, but I also put her in touch with some other people and I hope can help her also. It is amazing how many children in this world need that help.
Yeah.
My heart goes out to young people who don't live in a loving home and whose parents brought them to the world because they didn't know what else to do. I think children should be born everywhere to loving parents. They deserve to get every opportunity in life to grow up healthy and happy, but that is not the case. So what I learned through my own forgiveness is that we have the power to forgive. No one can give us that power and no one can take it away. It's mine to use in any way I wish. And when I discovered that I had the power to forgive, I was going to forgive Dr. Munch, but then a friend of mine who read my Declaration of Amnesty, because I was concerned about my spelling, she said that I should forgive Mengele, who really was my abuser, not Dr. Munch. And she said, well, I said to her, this is just a little letter. She said, I know. She said, pretend that you are talking to Mengele and telling him that you forgive him and see how is it going to make you feel. So I tried that and I immediately said, wow, I even have the power to forgive the God of Auschwitz. And I said, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah. I am not hurting anybody, so why couldn't I do it? So this is the way, and if I forgave Mengele as the worst of the worst, I decided that I might as well forgive all the people who have hurt me. And there were quite a few people who have hurt me. So that is the way we arrived in Auschwitz. I came with my children, Dr. Munch came with his children, and I would say that I find it the most amazing thing. I call anger a seed for war. And if the world is looking for a seed of peace, forgiveness is a seed for peace. we should teach every victim in the world that they have the power to forgive. I cannot forgive in anybody else's name. I only can forgive in my own name. But if we can teach them that they have the power and they want to be free from the pain that was imposed on them, then we have done a lot of good.
Yeah, that's so and true.
All forgiveness, a seed for peace.
Yeah. Did any of the other survivors disagree with your with?
Oh, they hate me. They absolutely hate me.
Really? That's
yes. They won't even talk to me.
That's horrible.
Only one single one who has forgiven, and I was very surprised. But he said to me that the reason, and I was in Israel 2 years ago, in December, and I wanted to meet with the survivors, and they, even though they agreed to meet with me, when I got there, they wouldn't even answer their telephones, so I ambushed some of them. I arrived at their house and see if they were at home. And one of them said to me that they are envious because I said that they can do the same thing I have done. And he happened to be the one, his name is Peter Greenfeld, but his name was Joseph Kleinman when he was born. And he's still looking for his twin sister, Martha Kleinman. They were separated at liberation, and he had not found her. But I was surprised that he would be the one who would forgive, because he told the doctor he didn't want to take the antidepressants anymore, and he wanted to see if he could get along without all the antidepressants. Many of the other twins are taking a lot of antidepressant medication.
That's how do you feel now that after you've forgiven, even do you
I
feel
free to do and think and act in any way I want to.
Yeah,
and that's what
very
every
important.
human being should do.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found your story so amazing.
Well, good luck with your project. I think you have enough material.
Yeah,
and
thank you so much.
Say goodbye.
Okay, thank you so much. It was really nice to meet you. Okay,
bye.
Bye.